the question marks. This is for the outcasts, so lost can draw. No one knows. Singing for the can't go back. Singing for the broken past. Singing for the just found out. Life is now upside down. If you're looking for hope tonight, raise your hand. If you feel alone and don't understand, if you fight the fight of your life, then stand. We're gonna make it through this hand in hand. And if we fall, we will fall together. Together. This is for the second chance. This is for the new romance. Singing for the love delay. Overcame, it's not too late. If you're looking for hope tonight, raise your hand. If you feel alone and don't understand, if you find the fight of your life, then stand. We're gonna make it through this hand in hand. And if we fall, we will fall together. Together. And when we rise, we will rise together. Together. If you're looking for hope tonight, if you feel alone tonight, if you feel part of your life, we're gonna make it happen, yeah. I will be by your side. It's the end tonight. Come up and see the light. Whenever, ever, just as long as we're together, say, if we fall, we will fall together. Together. And when we rise, we will rise together. Together. If we fall, we will fall together. Together. When we rise, we will rise together. Together we are dangerous. Together with our differences. Together we are bolder, braver, stronger.
Hello, church. It's Pastor Nick here, and I am so excited, wishing that we were able to be together at this time, but here we are once again. I hope you're all doing well as we're getting into the summer months now. During this time, I'd like to welcome you to our broadcast, to our time together. There's a quick announcement that next Sabbath we will be having our summer splash out at the Eikentoss house. I hope to see some of you there. And as we prepare to step into the presence of God and look at His wondrous love that He has for each one of us, I'd like to invite you all to prepare yourselves to be in His presence, and I will turn it over to our music crew that has a great number prepared for us. I hope that you're blessed by it.
I've been held by the Savior. I've felt fire from above. I've been down to the river to sing a prodigal return.
All my hope is in Jesus. Thank God my yesterday's gone. All my sins are forgiven.
Yes, they are.
I've been washed by the blood. I'm no stranger to prison. I've worn shackles and chains, but I've been freed and forgiven. Yes, I have, and I'm not going back. I'll never be the same. That's why I sing. All my hope is in Jesus. Thank God my yesterday's gone. All my sins are forgiven.
Oh, my Lord.
I've been washed by the blood.
There's a kind of thing that just breaks a man. Bring him down to his knees. Lord, I've been broken now more than a time or two. Yes, I have. But you picked me up and showed me what it means to be a man. That's why I sing today. All my hope is in Jesus. Thank God that yesterday's gone. All my sins are forgiven. Yes, they are. I've been washed by the blood. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Through many dangers, storms, and snares, I have already come. 'Twas grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, waiting last days to sing God's praise. And when we first begun,
Father God, we stand in awe of the amazing grace that you show each one of us, knowing that we were lost, but now that we're found in your sight is truly incredible and amazing. Bless us now, and let the words that I share be the ones that you have prepared. Thank you for guiding us through these moments and through these times. In your name I pray, amen. So, as we prepare for these next couple weeks, and as I was looking at the sermons I would be preparing over the next couple weeks, I noticed that next weekend there's a little holiday called Father's Day that's coming up. And so for the next 2 Sabbaths, we'll be looking at one story in the book of Luke, chapter 15. It's one of Jesus' most famous parables, and it is that of the prodigal son. For a little bit of context, Luke chapter 15 is the lost and found chapter. Jesus tells 3 stories, the first being about a lost sheep, the second about a lost coin, and the third about a lost son. During this story, it begins like this. Jesus says that there was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the property that is coming." I'd like to pause for just a moment on this request. This statement that is made by the younger son to his father, in our day to day, in our generation, it may come across as maybe a little bit insensitive. It's merely a question asking, "Hey, Dad, can I have maybe an advance in my weekly allowance? I'd like to be able to go live life a little bit." But what gets lost for us is some of the cultural baggage that is dropped here. In Jesus' time and in the Eastern culture, a request like this from the younger son to the father, if we were to paraphrase, would be something along these lines. "Dad, you know, I wish that I could have the inheritance, but the only way that's going to happen is if you die. So to skip over that process, I'd rather just jump to the end and you give me my share right now. You can be dead to me and I'll be dead to you for all intensive purposes, and I'll go live my life on my own." This statement carries a lot more weight than we initially realize. And as Jesus shares this, you can imagine his audience is in shock and disbelief. To have a son request this of the father is extremely disrespectful. It is a slander against the father's character. And culturally, the father is within his rights to take his son out into the town square and execute him on the spot for asking such a thing. And yet, the father does the unthinkable. The thing that no one could possibly imagine, the option that everyone thinks is off the table, is exactly what the father does. The father says, "Sure." And he divides his wealth. He takes his share of the property that would be given to the younger son. He probably sells it and then gives the proceeds to his younger son. And the younger son packs up his bags and leaves, it says. I'd like to pause briefly on this moment, on this passage, to look at a point that I think comes through here. Beyond the cultural insensitivity that is shown from the son to the father, the lack of respect in the relationship, in one sense, there's a part of this that maybe we can relate to and maybe we want. I think each one of us has this desire to be in command of our choices and be the person calling the shots. In fact, it's encouraged. My parents, as I got older, we began to go through this period where I began to take more and more decisions into my own hands, and I had the opportunity to be a little bit more independent. And that's encouraged in our society. So for the younger son to say, hey, Dad, I'd like to take off and be on my own, at some level, that is what we want. I would argue there's a sense in which God is arguing for each one of us to have that free choice, that free will. As a part of God's character of love, He's saying, you have the ability to choose. However, where I think the son's fatal flaw is in the attitude that is presented. This idea that not only am I going to be in control, I'm going to choose a certain path, but beyond that, I don't want to have the responsibility. I don't want to be held accountable. I want to be in control. But I don't want to deal with any of the responsibility that falls alongside that. I just want to go, have my fun, do whatever I want, and at the end of the day, no one can hold me accountable for living my life. In our culture today, this idea is very rampant, and it's extremely dangerous, I would argue, that we want to have all the power but none of the responsibility that comes along with that. And yet, as quick as I am to say that, I understand that there's a bit of me in there. There's a bit of me in that process that wants to have independence but none of the responsibility. The story goes on. Jesus says in verse 13, he says, "Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living." And it would be enough to simply say that for Jesus' audience. They could take that as it is. But he goes further. He describes how it works. He says, once he spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. This younger son who had everything at his fingertips. He had his wealth. He squanders it away. And then a famine rises up against him, and he is in need. It continues on. So he went and he hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his field to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. In this passage, we see a glimpse at the lowest point that this younger son has fallen to. A spot where he's looking at the pigs he's feeding, and he thinks to himself, hey, what they've got is pretty good compared to the nothing that's on my plate. I've titled this sermon, "We All Suck." And I'd like to share a little bit of why I chose that title. And it comes from a story during my time at Walla Walla University. During my freshman year at Walla Walla, I was talking to a friend of mine, and we decided we were going to start a flag football intramural team. So we gathered around, we went to all people in our hall. We didn't really care if they were athletic or not. We just said, hey, we're putting together a team, and we want to go out and we want to have fun. And that was the word we used for this flag football team. We're going to have fun. Well, we had a lot of fun, but it felt like fun was the opposite of winning, because we only won one game that entire season. And it was only because the other team didn't have enough people to show up. And so they ended up forfeiting before that we could lose to them. So after the season ended, a couple of us who had been invested in this team and weren't graduating, we said, hey, we want to win more games, and we can still have fun, but we feel like we might have even more fun if we win some games, not by forfeit. And so we started going around. We found out different people. We started scouting and recruiting for this team, and we built up our team. And one of the people that we recruited was this guy named Brennan. And Brennan is a great guy. He had some experience playing flag football in high school. But I'll never forget a phrase that Brennan would say. Throughout the season, we would have moments where that one-win team would come out. And we knew we were talented. We knew we had the strategy in place, but it felt like things just fell apart. The running backs wouldn't block, the snap would be too high, the receivers wouldn't get open, and our quarterback would get spooked and get sacked or throw a interception. And I remember over and over throughout the season, you could hear Brennan calling out over this chaos on the football field, "We all suck." And he would say this, not in the sense of he was trying to put us down, but just as a mere joke, a way to keep our spirits alive, that it's okay if we're not as good as maybe we hope we would be. It's fine to admit that sometimes we all suck. And he would say this, and I remember it'd bring a smile to my face, and I'd run out to go play defense, and well, all right, here we go, it's going to be fine. Oftentimes, we don't take that same attitude when we look at this prodigal son. Many of us are quick to distance ourselves from this man feeding the pigs, standing in want and in need. And yet, I would argue that each one of us has a few pigs of our own that wander around. Some of them are a lot more visible than we'd like them to be. Some of them are only known between us and God. But each one of us has pigs. Each one of us has problems. Each one of us has that thing that we wish we could get away from. And yet, as the story goes on, we have a moment here. Verse 17, "But when the son came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread? But I perish here with hunger. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your servants.' And he rose and he came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion. And he ran and embraced him and kissed him." An interesting point within this passage. We see that the prodigal son comes to his senses. It says he has the light bulb moment. He realizes that, actually, the food that I'm maybe eating with the pigs, I can do better than that. My dad actually has some land, and I could go work for him. And it's not going to be as good. I'm definitely not worthy of being his son, but I can at least go work for him. And it'd be better than what I've got right now. So he builds his statement that he's going to say, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I am not worthy to be your son. Please hire me on as a servant of yours. What's interesting to me is the language that gets used. It says that he begins to walk. We're not told how far away this far-off country is. We don't know. Maybe it's a couple months. Maybe it's just a few days that he's walking. Additionally, nor are we told how far off it is that the father sees him. Many times we dramatize this in our minds as the father is standing on the front porch and he sees the son a couple hills over and he just takes off running. But maybe he meets his son halfway. Maybe he meets the son 90% of the way. Maybe he meets him right outside the town gates. We see that the father is the first one to initiate this running towards the son. He feels compassion, runs, embraces, and kisses him. Additionally, culturally in Jesus' day, this idea of the elderly or the person of higher status running to meet someone of lesser status is unthinkable. It shows a lack of care, a lack of restraint, and quite frankly, it shows a little bit of that reckless spending that we see in the son. Except for with the son, he was spending possessions. We see the father spending his love recklessly. And as they embrace, the son begins to go into his spiel. He says, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And before he can get out that last bit about being a hired servant, the father cuts him off, it seems. And the father says, hold on to one of the servants. Go grab the coat and grab a ring to put on his finger and go get some sandals to put on his feet and grab the fattened calf. Bring that out here. We're going to have a barbecue. We're going to have a party. Because my son that's been dead all these All these weeks, all these months, all these years, we don't know. However long it's been, the Father says he was dead, but now he's alive. He was lost, but now he's found. We have this beautiful picture of the Father's heart. When we talk about the story of the prodigal son, really the hero of the story that we celebrate is that of the Father. We see a picture of a father who doesn't care what's been done, the money that's been lost. That's not on the forefront of his mind when he sees his child. And it's the same picture I think we get of God. When we come before God, we step before him, sometimes we think, all right, God, the best I deserve is to just be one of your servants. And I'll work as hard as I can. I'll do everything I need to do. But God, I certainly don't deserve anything better. And yet, we serve a God that looks at us and says, hold on. Before you even get to that point about being my servant, I want to remind you who you are in my eyes. You are my son. You are my daughter. You are my child. And that love that I have for you is not contingent on how far you are away or how close you are to me. My love is eternal in the way that it works. Quickly, let me remind you of all the ways that I think about you. That coat that signifies the status that you have, done. Your status is the same in my eyes as it was before. A ring to signify the authority that you have. Sandals to recognize that you are not destitute. Additionally, the party that the son has with the father, the reason he leaves, he goes off and he parties in this faraway country and he's left empty and destitute. And yet, it seems that the time he's finally fulfilled is when he arrives back home and the party gets thrown and he's finally filled. We see this picture of a father who cares so much more for each one of us than we can imagine. At this time, I'd like to welcome up on the panel members. We have David Futcher and Dan Hughes to share a little bit about this topic, and I thank them. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining me up front as we discuss this. The question that I guess I have as we reflect on this story is, how do we live with that child of God mindset? How do we exist in that state?
You know, there's a lot in the Bible about God and his role as a father. This is one of the, usually we hear about it as it relates to his relationship with his son, and to some extent with us, but this story, the thing I like about it is that it shows how he relates to imperfect people, which is pretty much most people you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's easy to think maybe it's that God and Jesus relate to each other because they're kind of the same person, right? Mm-hmm. Same being. But this shows us that not only does he care about the other perfect part of himself, but he's happy when us imperfect folks come back to him.
Yeah, that's well said.
Looking at it from the child of God aspect and looking at it, I don't know, it's kind of odd because I've always kind of thought, you know, I remember when I was young and I looked at some of those older people in their 20s and 30s and thought, well, someday I'll be mature like them. And then when I got in those 30s, I thought maybe I'll be mature when I, you know, hit those 40s and 50s. And now, since I just hit double nickels, I'm still looking and thinking, you know, it could still happen, maybe. So, you know, that being a child, you know, I think no matter what happens, we still kind of feel like a child in a way. And there's still so many of those relationships that, you know, that we still want to impress our Father, you know, and I think that's, you know, we still want to impress our God, and let's do it for the right reasons, you know. The story does bring out a different and unique point, though, and that means when we all come back to church, okay, and as we target for the 27th, shouldn't we be bringing out the fatted calf and having a big barbecue?
Figuratively, of course.
No, I'm talking literally. I'm taking my stance on that one.
There you
How's
go.
that?
Yeah, I think both those points that we share about God's interaction with us as broken people, that's something we've struggled with for a long time, is how does this perfect divine being work with the imperfections of humanity? And a long time that was thought of as, well, when the prodigal son runs away and he rejects his father's love, well, the famine's just God sort of reminding him that he messed up, and this is sort of karma coming in and knocking him out.
But it's also kind of that, I never really understood the love of God until I had children.
No.
You look, it doesn't matter if my kids are doing the perfect thing and they're doing great and meeting every expectation, or if they're doing some things that I'm kind of disappointed in and I don't necessarily agree with, I still love them. And that love has never wavered, and that love's never changed. And even at times when they may have been irritated with me and not talking to me, would I take them back at any second? Yes. And if we look at how we feel about our kids and what we would do for them, that's just a small glimpse of God's love for us. And so to me, looking at it after having children, it just changed my whole perspective on his love.
Yeah, as we're growing up, our only perspective of God, well, I don't know our only, but our main perspective of God, and hearing him referred to repeatedly as the Father, is, okay, you compare him to your father then. That you see God as a similar type of authority figure. And that can be okay for some people. That can be not an accurate picture of God for most people, though. So, I had a stricter father, and so I'm seeing God as this, shaking his finger at me whenever I mess up, out trying to get me and catching me when I trip up, trying to find the problems, because I came from that kind of a family. And like Dan said, it wasn't until, and this is literally moments after your child is born, your perspective has changed, and you get it all of a sudden. You can see this perspective of a love that is just never going to go away. It's just instant, and you got this bond. And as he mentioned, when you can't do anything, the kid can't do anything that's ever going to jeopardize that. And having that perspective of God really, really opened my eyes more to who he was, instead of just having my earthly, father to compare him to.
I wish I could say that I could sit in that role and that I had a child that I
coming.
could claim. Yeah, I know, it's on its way. God
Well,
has the plan, right?
Not immediately.
Yeah, not right now, but yeah, that's something growing up, and as I've gotten older and talked with my dad, that's something he has reflected on. He told me when I was in college, like, you're never going to fully understand exactly how much God loves you until you get to sit in his shoes for a quick second.
That's right.
When you get to experience that.
But I love how Dave said it's instantaneous.
Oh, yeah.
So my oldest, having 6 kids, I got plenty of examples, but, my oldest was born, Shelley had the flu and had a temperature when she went into labor. And so he had some medical issues when he was first born, basically because of her being ill. And anyway, I remember, they did a little spinal tap on him. All of a sudden, we go from having this great little baby we're holding to, he's in this little oxygen tent, and they put a little shave on his head and put an IV in his head. And I'm sitting there looking at this. And, I was super young at this time. Didn't understand the medical complexities that are going on. Don't understand that, well, that's just a good location for a vein and he won't knock it off. I'm just looking and thinking, this is just devastating. And I just remember going from 24 hours earlier, somebody I didn't know. And yeah, I talked to the little belly and I pretended like I knew, but not like the one. It wasn't the same. But the minute he was born, at that point, I would have very, very willingly given my life for his if I knew he wasn't going to make it, if not for that. Hands down. And it's just amazing how instantaneous that occurs.
Yeah.
That's
Look forward to it.
Yeah,
We don't want to build it up too much for you here.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's
Call
it's a
Dave
neat
and I the
moment.
next day.
You
Would
got it.
That's
Yeah.
right.
For my parents, I'll call you guys. So.
Yes.
But if you want to try and get a feel for that unconditional love relationship, the one place that I saw it really well described was in the book The Shack. You know, God is depicted in there as a female character, which is, you know, not what we typically think, but there's nothing wrong with that. You know, it still was very clear that she loved unconditionally you where you were. Not that she's like, well, you know, could you stop doing this and then you can come into my relationship? And that was what I needed to understand, is that God takes you where you are. You don't have to be good enough to come to him. He's glad to have you where you're at. And that's what I tell people, you know, if you wait till you're perfect to go to church, you're never going to go to church. So we'd love to have all the imperfect folks out here.
Yeah. I heard it once said by Sam Lenore that oftentimes we describe the church as a hospital. And that's really not the best example that we have, because with modern medicine and such, hospitals have become the place where you get sick, you go, and then you get discharged. If everything goes well, you're healed and you go home. Church is not that way. If you're getting healed after you go home from the church, you got healed from the wrong thing, because we're not looking at the same problem. The church is closer to the long-term care unit. We're all in this together. We're all struggling along, and that's good.
It's a long-term care unit and a support group.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like I don't want to say 12-step programs. They're not there's no definitive piece like that. But I come to church to be around other people who are not figured it all out, but they sure would like to do better. And I just get that support in me trying to do better by being around them.
That's what I even like of how our name really developed. You know, and some people say, well, you guys aren't even doing that Journey to Bethlehem thing. Why is a church called Journey? Well, the name Journey Adventist Church really has little to do with any big programs we did. It's more of, this is the journey that we're taking together and the life that we're doing together. And while it's a support program, while it's a long-term care program, it's also pretty useless without an ICU. You know, and there's times that people have needs, and if we're not a good intensive care unit for those people with needs, we're not doing our job and our responsibilities. But the biggest difference is you can one day be a needed individual needing that ICU. And a few days later, you may be the best expert on helping somebody else that's in that ICU. And so it's just, you know, just on how we give and how we serve and what we do and how, and then I'll even take it one more buzz, and it's creating wellness to a group that doesn't know they're ill. You know, it's how do you let people know that don't know him that this is a need and this is what they need.
I really like that idea. All of that, that it is a progression up to the point, you know, we start and we need help to the point that then we're able to help others. I wonder, in the midst of all that, obviously, when we're needing help, there's a sense of vulnerability that we have in that. I think in all relationships, there's some need for vulnerability. So how do we see that within the church structure when we have our prodigal moments? Is there a time and place to share those moments, those stories, you know?
That's tough. I tell you, showing that vulnerability hasn't always been something that people feel comfortable doing, you know, because there is an expectation that good people come here, kind of thing. And people are sometimes afraid or ashamed to talk about all the challenges in their life. When I think if we would do that more often, not that we need to dwell on the negative, but you would find out that you're not the only one who has those problems. As I've said before, it's like when you go out and play golf, you think everybody out there is a better golfer, and it turns out you're all pretty bad. When you come to church, you think everybody's a better Christian than you are. And if you really knew what was happening with most people, you're all struggling with something. As the pastor was asking me to join the group of elders, I was like, man, I'm not cut out for that. I am not good enough to do that. And he basically was saying, well, if I wait for the perfect people to be elders, I'm just not going to have any elders. So that made sense to me. And you got to have that perspective that perfection's not what we're looking for here.
Yeah.
It's okay to be a little bit broken.
Yeah.
And I think so many times and I think it's even worse as guys. Okay? Because we want to have a little bit of that, everything's fine. How about them bears? Whatever the scenario is. But it's amazing that when we just sit down and admit, look, we suck. And we're not all that great. And there's not a day that goes by that, we're all not needing to struggle with all of our issues. And I think it's really unfortunate in the Christian faith that we seem to want to pick out those certain sins and make those into those people instead of just looking and saying, yeah, what about all the little hidden things that are maybe going on with you and with me and with us that are, where's the acknowledgement there, and is that even worse? And and I don't think it's a place to air dirty laundry, and I don't think it's a place to say, look, I'm a greater sinner than you, therefore we can do this. But I think it is a place where, and especially in life situations where people are struggling, where you can say, I really struggled with that too. And I continue to struggle with it, but here's what I'm kind of doing to challenge it. And I think that so many times it's like people just feel like it's just me. When Nick asked me to if I would talk on the panel, and he kind of told me what his topic was on, I kind of had this, and I told him that first time I ever got asked to speak for a sermon here at the church was quite a few years ago, because Dave Livermore was pastor and Doug Fransky was here as associate, and they'd gone to Russia on a mission trip, and so I'd gotten asked, and they gave me the date, and it was April Fool's Day, and I'm like,
And you thought it was a coincidence.
and I thought, wow, isn't this fitting? Because I don't feel worthy of delivering a message. I don't feel, and this is God just saying, see, I told you you're not worthy. I mean, that's how I, kind of felt like. And so I ended up talking, and I still remember I entitled the topic, April Fool's Christianity, because
Cool.
we all just try to pretend that that everything's perfect. Instead of just saying, yeah, this is what it is, and here's life, and here's life struggles. And I just think it's so important that we are real.
It's hard to do.
Yeah. When I look at the story of the prodigal son, we're getting into the elder brother next week. So some of that pretentiousness and that pretend is definitely part of his character. And that's a whole other category of lost, right? It's all
Right.
still lost, but it's a different vibe on that. When we look at the prodigal, though, I see this character who fundamentally misunderstands the character of his father.
Sure.
When he comes to him and he says, you know what? I'd rather you just weren't around because that would be the better alternative so I can just have my stuff and do it the way I want to. And yeah, to admit that and to just kind of air a little bit of the struggles that maybe we've had with that relationship with God is hard, especially in a location like this or in a community like this. It's very easy, I think you nailed it, Dan, especially as guys, to isolate. Like, if I'm struggling with this, I'm going to go do it on my own and tough it out, and I'll come back out, and I won't cry, and I'll be in charge of my emotions. But that in the long term often ends up with us sitting next to the pigs, wondering if their food's better than ours.
Well, we're trained that way.
Yeah.
Right.
You know,
Culturally.
from the first time my older brother punched me in the arm and said, "Don't rub it, be a man," you know, that's, you know, we're trained to, you know, really not to expose that, and it's probably not the most valuable training we've received.
No. Yeah, it's that misunderstanding of who the Father is you're referring to there, Nick, is where I think we all fall short too of understanding our Heavenly Father. I think it's hard for us to really relate to somebody who, even as what we've learned as parents, to somebody who just has this unconditional love for us. And you know, we need to be striving to be more like that, obviously, and having love for other folks, and being thankful for the love that God gives us, where we really can't screw it up, even though we try, and I think some of us try really hard. It just doesn't work, and you can't mess up the love that He's given, and we need to have that same kind of love for other people. That's the hard part, though.
Yeah, the idea of something that doesn't end is something we have trouble with, because we know that there's a beginning and an end to everything for us. In our existence, we know this starts and this ends, and that's our existence. So to try to wrap our minds around something that just continues forever and is not contingent on this or that killing it or this or that stopping it is something we really can't understand until we experience the eternal, and I'm so glad that's coming, quite frankly.
I look forward to your talk next week, okay? Because I'm interested to hear kind of some of the perspective. Because when we look at this, you know, here in this 3 parables, okay, that are set up right in a row.
Yeah.
You know, we got the parable of the lost coin, the parable of the lost sheep, and then the prodigal son, the parable of the lost son. And in the parable of the lost coin, there's coins that they still have. Only one's lost, okay? In the parable of the lost sheep, they have the 99. They're just looking for the one. But in this case, are they not both lost? You know, so when you say you know, if you're looking at it as the lost son, which one are we talking about? You know, and so I just think it's such a, you know, an interesting perspective. You know, it's like when we earlier when we were talking about the story with, you know, quite a few weeks ago, we were talking about Mary and Martha, and people like, which one are you? Were you more of a Mary, more of a Martha? If you look at these 2 sons, which one are you?
Yeah.
You know, we don't want to strive to be either one.
Well, that's why it's interesting that in this, it's titled The Lost Sheep, The Lost Coin, and it's called The Prodigal Son. And that's because the term prodigal literally means to recklessly spend. It doesn't indicate lostness. So it is a statement on both of them are lost. And we've taken a term to, most of the verses are about this guy who goes out and he blows his money on partying and whatever. And then he has to come back but both sons are lost. It's not titled one lost son and the other one saved. So
Sorry if I'm stealing your
No,
thunder
no.
for next
it'll
week.
be
but
fun.
Right,
Yeah.
because we're used to earning things and getting them because of our actions, and again, we don't relate to that just unconditional love, and so the one who stayed around thought, I've earned this and I should still have it more than him.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it'd be interesting. I'll be interested to
Yeah.
hear what you got there. So how's that for a build up to next
Yeah,
week?
there you go. Little teaser.
That's right.
For next week. Thank you all for joining us. Dan, I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind praying for us.
You bet. You bet. Let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for being that awesome Father that no matter what happens, no matter what we do, no matter how much we disappoint you, you're still standing there with your arms reached out. You're still willing to run out to us, even though that may not be the normal right thing to do, but you're still there, ready to embrace us. And we just want to thank you for being the most awesome Father in the world. Amen.
Seems like all I could see was some struggles, haunted by ghosts that live in my past, bound up in shackles of all my failures, wondering how long is this gonna last. Then you look at this prisoner and say to me, son, stop fighting a fight that's already been won. I am redeemed. You set me free. So I'll shake off these heavy chains, wipe away every stain, and I'm not who I used to be. I am redeemed. All my life I have been called unworthy, made by the voice of my shame and regret. But when I hear you whisper, child, lift up your head, I remember, oh God, you're not done with me yet. I am redeemed. You set me free. So I'll shake off these heavy chains and wipe away every stain, 'cause I'm not who I used to be. I am redeemed. You set me free. So I'll wipe off these heavy chains and wipe away every stain, 'cause I'm not who I used to be. Because I don't have to be the old man inside of me, 'cause his day is long dead and gone. Because I've got a new name, a new life, I'm not the same, and a hope that will carry me home. I am redeemed. You set me free. So I'll shake off these heavy chains and wipe away every stain, 'cause I'm not who I used to be. Jesus, I'm not who I used to be. Oh no, I'm not who I used to be. I am redeemed. Thank God, redeemed.